Hello. This is our first session on Eve St. Agnes by John Keats. In all these sessions we'll be looking at the meaning of the poem, first of all, the narrative, the plot, what happens in it, and then peering deeper into Keats' use of authorial methods, particularly poetic methods. Then, of course, as it's we're approaching this from the tragic genre, we need to identify the tragic aspects in this text, as well as any other relevant contexts. So we'll begin by reading. I'll read through each stanza in sequence, and from that, if you could annotate along with me, if you can highlight and write down as I speak, that'd be fantastic. So we'll begin at the beginning here. Right, stanza 1. So Agnes Eve, bitter chill it was. The owl for all his feathers was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold. Numb were the beadsman's fingers, while he told his rosary, and while his frosted breath, like pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without a death, past the sweet Virgin's picture, while in his prayer he saith. Now what we have here, of course, straight away is the foregrounding of the religious aspects of this text, which concerns obviously St. Agnes Eve. St. Agnes, as we know from our context, was the Virgin Martyr, who has now become the patron saint of virgins and rape survivors, etc. Now, this is foregrounded in a couple of ways. Firstly, it's St. Agnes Eve, so it's at the time of the year. Secondly, we have this reference to the beadsman. And thirdly, we have reference to, of course, heaven, and then fourthly, to the Virgin, being the Virgin Mary. There's lots of religious imagery here, and we'll get to that in a moment. What is connected with it, first of all, though, initially, is Keats' description of climate, if you like, of the temperature of the weather. Now, St. Agnes Eve is in January, so it's winter time, and here we have the description. Bitter chill it was. So bitter chill. The next line was a cold. The hare is trembling. There's frozen grass. The flock are silent. It's called the beadsman. The gentleman has got his fingers which are numb. He has frosted breath. When he breathes, it turns into frost. So everything here is to do with the cold, to do with difficulty, to do with something being uncomfortable. Now there are lots of meanings here, of course. It foregrounds something unpleasant. Winter, which is the season, is the season of death, decline. So there's a hint of something kind of being fairly unpleasant. Now, the beadsman himself, as we'll see as a character, is elderly, is on his way out. So there's definitely a connection with mortality here, of turning cold, like a corpse. And when as soon as you die, it starts to turn cold. I think it's that kind of imagery is here. Now, the owl is cold, the hare is cold, the flock, that's the sheep, are cold. So is the beadsman. The beadsman is drawn into comparison with these animals, and it's worth a little bit sort of thinking why. He's not compared with anyone who's got high power. He's just compared with the lowest of animals. He's a figure of low status in this society. I think it helps if I explain what a beadsman is first of all. This is kind of the context. So a beadsman is like a monk or a religious individual who is effectively employed to pray for the souls of the dead, and in particularly he has to pray for the souls of the masters of this mansion where he's living, this kind of very large estate where he's living. He has to pray for them and for their ancestors to get to heaven. It's a very Catholic idea that someone else could pray for you to get you into heaven. This is the idea here. And the beadsman, now traditionally in Catholicism, when you pray, you have a bracelet perhaps of prayer beads, and each time you move one of the beads, you say a prayer. You move through the whole loop, the whole rosary is what it's called. Move through the whole rosary, moving each bead, and you say a prayer. And you keep going like that until you've said all of the prayers that need to be said. Now that's why he's called a beadsman, because he has these beads, and that's his job, is to pray for other people. He is presumably very, very poor. He has a low social status. He's not terribly important to the society in which he exists. Importantly then, we have reference to his rosary here, while he told his rosary while he's saying his prayers. Now, we have some details about this beadsman, though, which is very interesting. We have the fact that his breath is frosted, but it's moving up, and his breath is compared to pious incense. Now, something that's pious is devoted to God, it is good. And the incense is the smoke, the scented smoke that you get from church services. So his breath is compared to this sort of holy smoke, if you like. and it's from a censer. A censer is the object that the incense was put inside. Sometimes it was a ball connected to a chain that sort of swung. His breath is sort of moving, his holy breath is compared to this religious ceremony, and it's going up to heaven. It seems taking flight to heaven. His breath is moving up. His breath is moving upwards without a death, past the sweet Virgin's picture. While his prayer, he saith, his breath is going to heaven without a death. So he's not dead, but his breath is going upwards to purity. That tells us about the beadsman. He's devoted himself to praying for others. He is pious and good enough to get to heaven. It's going past the sweet Virgin's picture, and he's praying. The Virgin's picture, I guess, is important. It foregrounds again the issue, like the reference to St. Agnes, that this poem is about virginity, and particularly the loss of virginity. The Virgin here is the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mother. So there's a sense in which there's a sweet virgin, so virginity is considered to be sweet here, and it sets up a little tension. Of course, what we see later on, and there are characters that one of the main characters, Porphyro, wants to take the virginity from the other character, Madeline. So this is just an idea of foregrounding kind of an issue here. We move on to the second stanza here. It continues its details of the beadsman. It says, his prayer he saith, this patient holy man, then takes his lamp and riseth from his knees, and back returneth meagre, barefoot one, along the chapel aisle by slow degrees. The sculptured dead on each side seem to freeze, imprisoned in black purgatorial rails, knights, ladies, praying in dumb oratories, who passeth by, and his weak spirit fails, to think how they may ache in icy hoods and mails. So again, we have lots of descriptive detail about this figure. It is worth pointing out, ultimately, that the beadsman is not a protagonist. He's not a central character. He appears here at the beginning and is referred to again at the end, but he's not absolutely central to the poem. But there are some interesting things that Keats does with this imagery and with the symbolism of the text, which is something we'll talk about in class. But here, let's just look at the description, the characterization of this figure. So he's still praying. He's described as patient and holy man. Patient and holy. And he stands up, he takes his lamp, so he can see, because it's dark, it's night time, and riseth from his knees, and back returneth. And again, he's described as meagre, barefoot, and wan. This nice little rule of three. It's an asyndetic rule of three, potentially suggesting that it could go on, potentially suggesting that his situation is worse than it's described here. But he's meagre. It's just something that's meagre. It's sort of small, underdeveloped. Perhaps he's very thin. Perhaps he's malnourished, undernourished. He's barefoot. He's not wearing shoes. Now, that could be a sign of his devotion. It could be a sign of his poverty. And he's wan, which means to be very, very, very pale, sort of sickly pale. So he seems in a kind of a lowly way. He's poor and slight and thin and pale. He doesn't seem to be in a healthy state, and that's important because, as we'll see, the beadsman, as I said before, is on his way out. He's near the end of his life. He's very old and he's very decrepit. What does he do? He moves along the aisle by slow degrees. He's moving slowly, and again, that might be because, of course, his age is restricting him. Now, what's important about the setting, though, is interesting. The chapel is a Christian chapel. It should potentially be a setting of safety, comfort, happiness, joy. But actually, what we have is a lot of very gothic imagery, a lot of very disturbing images, a lot of references to things that are kind of dark and unpleasant. Let's have a look. So he moves along the chapel, and it's described, the sculptured dead on each side seem to freeze, imprisoned in black purgatorial rails. Okay. So here we have sculptured dead. Presumably there are sculptures of the deceased, the figures that the beadsman is praying to, and they're frozen. They can't move. There's a hint about whether they can actually get to heaven or not. That's continued here, therefore, in the next line. Imprisoned in black purgatorial rails. They're trapped, they can't escape. The blackness suggests that there's a dark fate, seems particularly unpleasant. And the purgatorial rails, they're trapped in where they are. Now, purgatory, the Catholic faith believes there are three potential destinations in the afterlife. If you die and you were good, you get to heaven. If you die and you're bad, you get to hell. If you die, you're a bit bad, but not good enough to get into heaven, you have to go to the celestial equivalent of the dentist's waiting room. You have purgatory, a place where you will wait, depending on how many sins you've done for a certain amount of time. So if it's a few sins, maybe waiting there very quickly. If you're a pretty sinful person, but not obviously sinful enough to get to hell, you might be waiting quite a long time in purgatory. But eventually, waiting some time there, you will then be admitted to get into heaven. So what we have here is these figures, this dead, they're imprisoned. Okay? It's again something that's really unpleasant. They're imprisoned, chained up, constricted in these purgatorial rails. The rails presumably are like a barrier around the sculptures, something that's kind of containing them. And what we have here, though, of course, is the beadsman sort of reflecting, thinking about, or the setting is showing us that the beadsman is in an area where people are not actually getting to heaven. And there seems to be a question about the ability to get to heaven. What does it take to get to heaven? And it continues. There's a description of the statues. The knights, ladies, praying in dumb oratories. Dumb means they're not speaking, they're silent. Oratories is speech. So the statues look as if they're praying, but they're silent, aren't they? And he passes by these silent praying sculptures. And then his weak spirit fails. And that's very interesting. So again, we have a sense of his weakness. Before it was a kind of a physical weakness. He's barefoot, he's worn. Here it's to do with his emotions, his spirit. Is he losing faith? You might think about it as his weak spirit fails. Or is he starting to collapse? Has he got no energy? To think how they make, but then if you look at it, the line continues. There's a run-on line, or as we speak about in poetry, enjambement. Okay, enjambement. Here, his weak spirit fails. To think how they may ache in icy hoods and mails. So there's a question about whether he's failing to think. Okay, he's failing to think about the aching of the dead. Okay, in the icy hoods and mails, the knights they've got hoods, they've got chainmail. Is he thinking about the knights and the ladies there, or is he only thinking about himself? That might be one issue. Is he starting to forget his role? Okay, at praying for the dead. That's the important thing religiously that he performs. Is he thinking about something else, or is he failing? Is his spirit failing? He's upset. Could mean he's upset when he thinks about the aching of the dead. And he feels that he needs to do something about it. Let's read the next stanza. Northward he turneth through a little door, and scarce 3 steps ere music's golden tongue flattered to tears this aged man and poor. But no, already had his death bell rung. The joys of all his life were said and sung. His was harsh penance on St. Agnes' Eve. Another way he went, and soon among rough ashes sat he for his soul's reprieve, and all night kept awake, for sinners' sake to grieve. Now here's again several important little details. Northward he turneth through a little door. He turns north. Now north again is symbolic of darkness, of the cold. It's the place without light. So is he moving towards his death? Again is the question. And scarce 3 steps ere music's golden tongue, before he hears music. Now music is described in an important way here. It's personified. It's given human characteristics. It's got a tongue. The music's golden tongue. The gold suggests of luxury. It's a kind of temptation, maybe. Music's golden tongue is luxury, wealth, riches. The tongue is obviously an erotic organ. It's used in kissing. There's something here that is seductive about music, erotic about it, he's being attracted to. Now, he's a religious man, and as a Christian, particularly if he's a monk, he should be resisting sexual desire, especially sensual desire. It could be sensual, like physical pleasure, the pleasure of music is tempting him. And ere music's golden tongue flattered to tears this aged man and poor. He cries when he hears this music. There's some thinking about why. Maybe because it's reminding him of the pleasures of life, the things he's abandoned to follow his religious existence. Okay, he's flattered to tears, crying. Again, he's called an aged man. He's old and poor. Again, so it's quite clear here. Poor might mean that he is there's some level of sympathy, that he's suffering, or again, it might be this reference to his actual financial poverty. But no, okay, the narration is quite clear. No, already had his death bell rung. There's no sort of hope that he can enjoy any of these joys. His death bell has rung. It sounds like he's on his way out. Again, it's very, very clear here in the text. The joys of all his life were said and sung. There's no joy left for him. He can't embrace the pleasure of music's golden tongue. Everything is done. His was harsh penance on St. Agnes' Eve. Now, penance here is, if you do penance, you do a punishment to make up for a sin. So the way he views his life now, the way it's conceived is making up for his sin. Now, is that his prior sin or his sin of being tempted by music is slightly unclear. Either way, he feels the need to have penance. Another way he went, and soon among rough ashes sat he for his soul's reprieve. So he's sitting now for his own soul, okay, hoping to get to heaven. To be reprieved is to be saved, if you like, to be made better. and all night kept awake for sinners' sake to grieve. So he actually is going to continue praying for other people. All night he's going to stay awake, grieving for them, okay, feeling sorry for them. So there's a very kind of interesting image here. We have the possibility of living a life of pleasure. It's something the bedesman turns away from, and he feels the need to punish himself for even being tempted. And he sits up all night, to help himself get to heaven, but also to help others get to heaven. So he seems very kind of a moral figure. He's resisting temptation, and now he's turning towards religion. Okay? He is going to devote himself at the end of his life to religious pursuits, goals. Let's read the next stanza. That ancient bedesman heard the prelude soft, and so it chanced for many a door was wide from hurrying to and fro. Soon up aloft the silver snarling trumpets 'gan to chide. The level chambers, ready with their pride, were glowing to receive 1,000 guests. The carved angels, ever eager-eyed, stared where upon their heads the cornice rests, with hair blown back and wings put crosswise on their breasts. Again, we have a little bit of detail about how the bedesman is responding to the situation. He heard the prelude soft. He hears a soft bit of music, or the events that are going on. And so it chanced from many a door was wide, from hurry to and fro. So you hear the music through all the doors are opened. There's a big party going on. People are rushing to and fro. Soon up aloft, the silver snarling trumpets 'gan to chide. And now he hears trumpets. Okay, there's a little bit of discussion, a little bit lovely bit of description here. So the silver snarling trumpets. Lots of sort of sibilants here. S sounds. Silver snarling trumpets. Sound kind of perhaps uncomfortable, aggressive, even. Let's have a look at it. But before we had music's golden tongue, now we have another description. Now there's silver snarling trumpets. Snarling is a zoomorphic expression. It's what animals do when they're aggressive. The trumpets sound aggressive, and they began to chide. They begin to criticize him. Okay, or they begin to criticize. And why? He feels now perhaps that the trumpets are calling him to pleasure, or criticizing him for not coming to the pleasure. There's this level of temptation he's experiencing. They're not golden though. Music is now not golden, it's silver, and it's interesting to think why. Silver is a precious metal, it is attractive, but crucially, unlike gold, it tarnishes, it discolours very, very easily. So now the trumpets, music is something that could tarnish, could harm him, could hurt his soul. And he seems to feel music as a temptation, yes, but something that's now criticising him. He was in opposition to it. Before, it was a temptation that he was very, very much moved by. He felt the pull of it. Now he seems to see it oppositionally. And this is the way it's being described. The level chambers, ready with their pride, were glowing to receive 1,000 guests. There's a huge party. We've got emphasis here on things like pride, glowing, a sense of expectation here, something quite extravagant and impressive. Okay, I'm going to leave that here for the moment. I'm going to pick up in the next video.